morning, everybody. Welcome to this regular meeting of the El Paso MPO. Today is February 23rd, 2018. It is 9:02 a.m. This session is now in order. All right. Go on. Oh, Pledge of Allegiance. Is the mayor from Socorro here yet? No. No? Okay. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Move on to the first item, which is open comment period.
For public comment, I have Mr. Mike Rooney, Mr. John Iberg,
I got it down to 2 minutes and 15 seconds.
oh, there's an extra chair, no?
Okay. Buenos dias, good morning, todos. It's a pleasure to see all of you once again. My name is John Iberg, aka Juanito Iberg, aka Biker John, and I am an expert bicyclist. In fact, I have a field report for you. I have just completed my one country, two state, retired, emphasis on the second syllable, bike tour. It was over 1,081 kilometers, 649 miles long, and I have nothing but good things to say about TxDOT and New Mexico DOT. Except, now you, yeah, don't clap yet, because I have the caveat. The road work that you've completed on 62180 going out toward Guadalupe is great, except when you put in that center turn lane, and this has been characteristic throughout Texas, you cut the shoulder. Now, it wasn't totally cut. I was still able to pedal on it, but for someone who's a little less confident or as experienced as I am, might have some trouble with that. And I know you want to save money by not having to buy more right away, but it would be the parts of 62180 where you don't have the center turn lane, or it wasn't a center turn lane, it was the passing lane. East and west passing lane, it would change. You have a great shoulder. New Mexico DOT, your roads are just a cut above what TxDOT is doing. Except for 176. That is the road that connects 62180 to Eunice, New Mexico, in New Mexico. No, I was very much on track. I only go on paved roads, and if it's on the map and it's paved, I'll take it. So it starts out such a great route because it junctions in to 62180 about 35, 40 miles west of Hobbs. And that was my shortcut down the Eunice. I couldn't believe how great a road it is for the first 10 miles. It is 30 miles long. At 10 miles, after 10 miles of this absolutely 5-star world-class road, and we have a few of them around here, I couldn't believe it. I thought I was back on Ruta Dos pedaling west from Juarez. It was really, really rough. I couldn't believe it. 10 miles later, it goes back to being world-class 5-star.
Mr. Iberg, you have 3 minutes.
Are you sure? Your clock's a little slow. Okay. Anyway, I did a lot of pedaling on the routes, mostly Route 18, which goes both New Mexico and Texas, Route 385 down through Big Bend, Route 118, Route 170. TxDOT, New Mexico DOT, you're making some good roads.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very, very much, all. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
Gracias, thank you.
Mr. Scott White, were you gonna do public comment?
No, but I'd like to sign up for number 2.
Okay.
Okay, all right. And the next item on the agenda?
Next item is discussion and action to approve the motions and minutes for the January 26, 2018 Transportation Policy Board meeting.
Is there a motion on the floor to approve the minutes? There's a motion on the floor? There's a motion that's been seconded. Any discussion? None? All those in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. The minutes have been approved. Item number 2?
Item number 2 is discussion and action to approve the resolutions for Texas and New Mexico to adopt safety targets.
Good morning, members. Mike Beenan with the MPO. There's a new federal requirement for the MPOs and the DOTs to adopt safety targets. And so before you are 2 resolutions, one for the New Mexico component, the other one for Texas. And so essentially is that what the direction from the federal partner is a requirement of either the MPO developing its own performance measurements or adopting the state one. So the resolution reflects a request to this body to adopt the state safety targets. So if there's any other questions from that perspective, yes, sir.
Is it possible to make it written in such a way that if the state changes, that ours automatically change, or do you have to come back to us each time?
I think we need to come back to them.
Do we just mirror theirs and their changes?
They actually are requiring, like with New Mexico, to have the statistical data within, attached to the resolution. And so I prepared 2 different resolutions, one for Texas, one for New Mexico, different requirements of the states. I think that the safest thing to do, the better thing to do, is if they do change some of their statistics, and if there's a need to reflect it, I think it's best just to have a new resolution. It's not that much trouble.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How does this affect our project rankings? How does this affect the region? Because these are statewide targets. How do we translate that to the local MPO region?
Right, so that's a very good question. My understanding, Mr. Marquez, is that at the state level, the requirement is for the state to demonstrate that. From our perspective is that the MPO would work with the state DOT, in this case the districts here, and look at any opportunity to identify those hot spots, for example. So if we have projects that are addressing safety and not necessarily safety as an autonomous component, there are different projects in the region that identify safety as one of the parameters. So one of the things that we're doing with this new plan, we've identified a safety component to that. And it would be brought to the policy board to look at that, examine that, and adopt it. So from there, the working relationship between the MPO and the districts is to identify those hotspots. So in relationship to project prioritization, it'll be something that will be brought forth through a recommendation from TPAC to this body.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mike, what's the, how about for transit statistics? Since we report transit statistics to FTA already, and they're talking about doing a transit, some of the thing for transit, are our statistics in these statistics?
Right. Yes, sir. So there's actually some communication that the MPO had sent to Sun Metro. We are required to develop an MOU between the DOTs and transit agencies along with the MPO. It's really more about looking at performance measurements, but certainly safety would be a component to that.
So it'll be separate from these?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Any other questions? There's a motion on the floor to approve. Is there a second? The motion has been seconded. Oh,
We do have public comment.
okay,
Oh, did you want to approve it first?
that's fine. We can take the public comment now.
Good morning, members of the board. Scott White with El Paso Bicycle Pedestrian Coalition. Many times I've been here before you talking about safety issues in one way or another. And safety is important, but it has to be more than statistics. What I see here in this document, and it may be abbreviated, is just some statistics. It doesn't give us context. It doesn't give us situation. It doesn't give us time. It doesn't lay out a plan to remedy these safety concerns. If we have a hotspot, what is mandated? Do we have to go in and actually fix this and make it safe, or are we going to simply say, oh, let's just put up signs or something? Safety really requires a great deal of planning and understanding. And if the work that's been done by TxDOT's engineers, NMDOT's engineers, EPDOT's engineers proves to be less than satisfactory, and I'm not saying it is, but if it proves to be, is there a plan to go back in and say, let's remedy this situation? Let's find a way to make it safe for the people who use this corridor. Without that kind of work, this plan, this resolution really has no value to this region as I see it. We need to make sure there is actually teeth in this. And Dr. Noah, I've heard you talk about lighting many times in projects. Is there safe lighting? Is there visibility? What kind of solutions can be recommended? These are the kind of things we need to be looking at to make sure that whatever mode you are traveling in, this roadway is safe for you and that you don't become one of these statistics. Thank you very much.
Any additional public comment?
No additional comment.
Thank you. I do have a motion on the floor. The motion has been seconded. All those in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. The motion has been approved. Item number 3.
Item number 3 is discussion and action to amend the Horizon 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Horizon 2017-2020 Transportation Improvement Program to amend Pelicano Drive Wainin Build Project CSJ number 0924-06-534 MPO ID number P410X-158 to use $8 million Category 10 Coordinated Border Infrastructure funds along with already approved $8,220,000 of Category 7 Surface Transportation Program Metro Mobility funds and $1,780,000 of Category 5 Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality funds for a total construction cost of $18 million in fiscal year 2019. Fiscal year 19.
For the board's knowledge is that there was a request from the county to bring forth an item and then also item number 4 by the district. Normally is that we would recommend that items go through the technical committee. At the last board meeting, there was a lot of discussion about the influx of the uncertainty of the STIP revision in Texas. The STIP is the statewide improvement program. And so we have opportunities every quarter to make adjustments to that if the board wishes. And so one of the things that is before you is a request from the county to address CBI funding. Understanding that we really don't understand what's going to happen at the STIP level, if there's going to be other opportunities aside from the March one that we've been told. The 2 items, 3 and 4, are subject to any STIP revision that may come within the same fiscal year of 2018, or we may have to wait till 2019. So in lieu of just waiting to see what happens, we brought it forward to the policy board to make any recommendations to move forward or simply send it back to TPAC. With regard to CBI, the process is that a recommendation or an acknowledgement from the federal partner has to be communicated to the agency. So in this case, the county submitted an application through TxDOT to the FHWA. It was approved. From a TPAC perspective is that we had our regular TPAC meeting, then followed by a special TPAC meeting. We did not receive the communication of approval from the FHWA till afterwards. So aside from that, I'll let Mr. Landeros talk on this.
Jose Landeros with the County of El Paso. The county began the CBI application process with FHWA back in December, once we, along with all the other agencies, had received notice of the balances through the MPO's annual reconciliation of funds. The county submitted the application to TxDOT. TxDOT then reviewed it, and once concurring with the county's request, forwarded that request directly to FHWA. We received notice a few days before Valentine's Day, which, as Mr. Medina mentioned, was after the special TPAC agenda had already been posted. And so, given the fact that the February revision to the STIP, or the state planning documents, was to occur in February, but has been delayed till March, and the uncertainty of whether or not that revision will come early March or late March really puts us as an agency in a difficult position, because if we were to wait, we've also learned that FHWA may consider deleting the May revision to the STIP, which would then mean that we wouldn't have an opportunity to have these funds programmed into the state's planning documents until fiscal year 19, around November is the first STIP revision. And so, given that this is a 2020 network project, it's a capacity project, which means that we have, as an agency, to ensure that this is completed before the end of calendar year 2020. And our construction timelines range from anywhere from 18 to 24 months. We need to ensure that the funds are programmed on this project so as to not delay construction, which is why once we received that communication, we consulted with MPO staff, who said given the uncertainty of the STIP revisions, it would be prudent to bring this forward directly to the board. Again, as Mr. Medina mentioned, the project has been vetted and reviewed and concurred by both TxDOT and FHWA, and so we ask the board for your favorable consideration on the item.
Mr. Chairman? Yes, sir.
Just on the coordinated border infrastructure funds, and I know you made a comment that this hasn't had the technical analysis, but are there any other projects out there that are pending? I mean, that would make a big decision for me. If this money is available after the reconciliation and there's nothing out there pending, I would assume we would do this. So my question is there any other projects that would have competed for that balance?
Well, certainly there's many projects that would be eligible for CBI. I think any other project within the region. If we fall back to the process, I have no knowledge of any other agency consulting with the MPO and TxDOT and submitting an application for FHWA to review. So understanding that, I would say this is probably, to my knowledge, the only project that I know that has gone through that.
Well, how widespread is it known that the reconciliation had these balances? I mean, there may not be anybody else that has applied to FHWA for the border funds. But again, is that widely known by all the entities that have eligible projects?
I think that the MPO has demonstrated the communication to TPAC and the board. In December, at those two meetings, staff presented numbers, and my knowledge of the CBI is that the number has stayed consistent with those presentations. And again, is that we try to coordinate as best as we can, but it's always best to send send requests to the MPO with regard to funding, because every funding category has eligibility requirements. And so again, before you is a request from the county to examine what is before us in terms of the STIP revisions.
So what would the staff recommendation be?
So understanding that the MPO presented the balances to TPAC, to this policy board in December, considering that the MPO and TxDOT provided information to the county on the process, the FHWA came back and favorably agreed that this project is eligible for CBI. If you're asking for an MPO staff recommendation, it's followed the process, it's eligible, and I would recommend we move forward to capture the uncertainty of the STIP.
With that explanation, I would move to approve.
We do have a motion on the floor made to approve. The motion has been seconded. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Abstentions. Motion carries unanimously. Item number 3 has been approved. Item number 4.
Item number 4 is discussion and action to amend the Horizon 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Horizon 2017-2020 Transportation Improvement Program for FM 1110 Phase 1 from FM 76, which is North Loop Drive, to I-10 CSJ number 1281-02-007, MPO ID number P520B-1-15A to add 10 million of Category 11B to the existing local contribution of 5,500,000 for a total construction cost of 15,500,000 in fiscal year 2018. Project to be included in the February State Transportation Improvement Program revisions, now scheduled for March, contingent on approval of the amended Horizon 2040 conformity documents.
Good morning. Eddie Voltaire, Texas Department of Transportation. This item is, as stated, to add 10 million of Rider 11B. So the history on this is that this project was included in the CCMP, the County Comprehensive Mobility Plan, which we're working with the County of El Paso. Originally, it had local funds of $5 million. At that time, the project, of course, widens this facility in that area because of the increased volumes of traffic and the growth in the area. What happened was this project had to go through an amendment process for the 2040 MTP, the current MTP, for additional capacity. So it was submitted. In the process of that being submitted, after that, we received notification of allocations for Rider 11B. The district vetted all our 2018 projects and tried to find what was the best fit for these funds, if anything needed funds. And then we also vetted our 2019 projects to see what we needed to do. We received 2018 and 19 allocations. So this project is the closest fit that we were able to get for for using these funds in 2018, and the scope does not change. It's the same project, only instead of basically scabbing on asphalt for the widening of the project, we're able to put out a much better facility in concrete, full concrete all the way across. Also enhanced drainage so that we can have inlets and capture all the runoff, and there will be also some, to our standard, landscaping and also some paths on the project.
Yes, sir.
Eddie, the 10 million 11B is for the district, and 18 and 19 is for the district?
Yes.
So those of us sitting here get kind of selfish. I know Bob has a district that goes out, the senator is aware of that. So is this, is the other 10 million going to go outside of kind of this area, but in the district?
So our 2019 allocation is actually allocated to...
And that's a good thing, because I think the first allocation went for the bridge in Presidio.
Correct.
Right. And so the 19 allocation is actually on the I-10 Connect project, which is right at the border.
Both in the district.
Right.
Both in this area.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Couple questions.
Sure.
Thank you for the update. So the project was originally $5 million, now we're at $15 million. That's a significant difference. You said the project really isn't changing in scope, but a $10 million difference. What happened? I think in the last conversation we had last month, we were talking about how these numbers need to be accurate in order for us to do project planning. Obviously, that wasn't the case. So what happened where there's a tripling of the budget?
Sure.
Now.
So again, you have one lane in each direction currently. So we're widening to do 2 lanes in each direction. So the original project was going to add just a single lane in asphalt. What we're able to do with these funds is make the entire full width. So now you're not only doing the 1 lane in concrete, you're also doing the existing lanes in concrete. You're also, instead of doing drainage that would be, for $5 million, you don't get very far. So you would be doing more of the drainage that collects on the side rather than actually capturing it in inlets and underground. And so you have inlets and you have concrete pipe. It's the same footprint. It accomplishes the same thing. It's just a better facility. Once you get the large traffic volumes, we won't be out there maintaining it every year. So in the life cycle cost, it's actually a benefit to do this.
And you say it's coming from the 11B, correct? So can you explain that fund a little bit more? You said this project fit the most into that
Sure.
category. What is that category looking for?
Sure. It's very same rules for the CBI. Basically, it's a project that is within, I believe it's 50 miles of the border area, that will help traffic, mobility, congestion. It's intended for the border districts only. And again, but I think the key thing on this was the allocation was for 2018. So there are other projects that are in the queue, but they all have their processes, environmental, right-of-way, and so on. This project was the one that fit to match when we have to use these funds.
And this additional funding is only for stage 1, correct? It'll not be used for stage 2?
That is correct.
And I made it very clear that I support stage 1, but I'm very against stage 2, which I will be bringing up more accurately or more appropriately in the next meeting, like we had agreed to in the December meeting. But if these funds will not be in any way, shape, or form, and I want that guaranteed for stage 2.
Phase 2 is a different CSJ with a different letting date.
I might have more questions. Thank you.
Any other questions?
And just along those lines too, I wanted to make sure, and I'm sure you already answered it, but this is not gonna in any way expedite, just to confirm again, phase 2 or change that, this is solely phase 1?
This is a separate project that will end at North Loop.
Okay, thank you.
For those of us who only know a little bit, what's so bad about phase 2?
I'm happy to answer that question. We could all answer that. Everyone who lives down there can answer that question.
We need to talk about it because we make these decisions as a group for the region, and obviously there's some objection to phase 2, but there may be some people who.
That's appropriate music.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't mean to bring it up. But really would like a little bit more background so that when we, as individual members, get hit with this, we know what it is. Wait, let me get TxDOT's first. Let me get the well.
No, I'm just gonna give the
me
history.
technical
I'm not gonna
details-
sway one way or the other.
Technical details first.
So the original project and the study that went on goes all the way up to Alameda. So we have a current roadway between I-10 and North Loop. So the actual schematic and study went all the way to Alameda, which we don't have anything from North Loop to Alameda. So that requires right-of-way purchases going over railroads, and so it's a little bit longer process. That project was placed in a later letting. So the idea, again, is to get connectivity going in the lower valley. So we have a lot of issues on Loop 375. This would be another way to get from Alameda all the way to I-10. That's the intent. There are issues as we go through all projects.
So between North Loop and Alameda is
the
right-of-way
new
acquisition
location, right.
is probably going to be the sticking point. So
Right.
you don't have the right-of-way.
We don't have the right-of-way. The study identified several alternatives. The best alternative in our process was forwarded, and that's where we are right now in discussions. And so, we'll continue with the process that we have in place, the federal process, and if Bob has anything to add to that,
No, it's just that the federal process, the environmental process hasn't finished yet. So phase 2 is not complete in terms of that process.
Is phase 2 been modeled as added capacity
Yes.
as well as phase 1?
that is in the amendment.
So, but phase 2 is in our long-term plan. And it's modeled as a 2-lane in each direction, just for the conformity aspect.
Yes, sir. So both of these phases for the subject project are added capacity projects, and so they're in the amendment that the FHWA is currently reviewing. And with regard to the upcoming plan, Destino, they are also captured there.
Okay, thank you.
And Chairman, we also need to take a look and discuss with all the parties the effect of the fact that they're in the model and what changing the model has to do with the overall plan. What's the best way to do that if we're going to do it? What jeopardizes other projects? What doesn't? So that's really a discussion that we should hold, not at this meeting, but we can have separate working sessions on that.
Hold on, let me, Representative Mark.
Yeah, just going back to the process on how we determined this project was a priority for funding, can you expand on that process? And then a follow-up question is, does it affect, kind of like Chairman Pickett's question, how does it affect funding for other projects in the region, and are other projects eligible for this funding?
So with these allocations, the intent was to use on-system. Okay, so the intent was to use on-system. That was one of the conditions. So what we did is we, again, once the funds were allocated to us officially in the UTP, because it has a deadline to use by 2018, first thing we did is look at all our 2018 projects. And if anything was short, that's the first thing that gets it, right? If there were any new projects, are they eligible to be, can we accelerate them into 2018? But that's where you run into a lot of the federal issues. You know, you have to have your environmental cleared, you have to have your right-of-way cleared, utilities cleared. So, you know, if you have a really clean project, you might be able to put it on a 19 or 20 project and bring it in. We did not find any of those on the on-system because we usually have right-of-way utilities and environmental. So it was determined that this project here, it's a great project that leads to a new bridge that we just widened over I-10. And that has been really successful for trucks to turn, and radiuses of, you know, where we used to get our bridge knocked up a little bit and we had to repair it. So this is really a continuation of that footprint all the way down to North Loop. It just made sense for what we had in the queue that this project vetted right.
And are other projects eligible for this funding?
For these allocations, they were on system, so any on system project would be eligible if it was within the 50-mile radius.
Okay, thank you.
Senator?
Yes, kind of like a follow-up question to Representative Gonzalez's question. With regard to the use of these funds, and I think you explained why this qualifies as an 11B category fund. But I wonder, are there criteria that you all have developed that you follow to determine which projects, apart from whether they're ready and all that, that you follow to allocate these types of funds? Because you pointed out that one of the factors is that any project has to be within 50 miles of the border.
Sure.
So that means literally every single project that we have in our metropolitan
Right.
area fits within that category, right?
Right.
But it seems to me there would be some criteria that would be followed that prioritizes projects for border infrastructure funding. And so my question is, do we have any kind of criteria developed along those lines?
Well, the way that those are evaluated, first of all, virtually any project in the district is within 50 miles of the border. So that everything to Big Bend. It has to be on system, so which means it's got to be on a state highway. It's got to be one of our projects. So the way we take a look at it is what project has the most impact on people. For example, part of the issue for 1110 between North Loop and I-10, from all of the input that we had, were turning radiuses on both ends, both at the bridge as well as turning radiuses at 76, FM 76. What we're doing on this, since we're going to concrete and adding median and safety lighting and the rest of that, we can improve those radiuses. When we just add a lane on either side, we don't get the kind of width and turning radius we would really like to have there. So that's how we evaluated that one. The other projects that we had, we still have to spend these funds in fiscal year 18. So when you take a look at the other projects that we have, like Mesa, improving Mesa, one of the issues there is we can't really improve Mesa until after we finish Go 10, because we're still throwing a lot of traffic onto Mesa. Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of balances that we go through. We take a look at the impact, what satisfies the most local needs, what's possible in terms of adjusting local traffic, how does one project impact other projects and detour routes, and readiness. It has to be able to finish the environmental process, all of those processes, and be ready to let in this fiscal year. Mm-hmm. So those are all the elements that we look at as we go through it.
Yeah, it sounds like those elements are determined, evaluated, as you say, depending on the circumstances at any given time that we want to allocate some of these funds, do we do any, as part of this process, planning to say, you know, really what we really need
Yeah.
for improvement in border infrastructure transportation is this kind of project, and then be thinking of using the funds, weighing up those projects to get them to the point that you're talking about, Mr. District Engineer, so that we allocate the funds in that way as opposed to whatever project is in the mix right now, we don't want to lose the funds, so we decide for the kinds of considerations that you talked about, that we're going to allocate the funds that way.
Right.
Is there a
and-
planning aspect to this?
Yeah, there is. And in fact, this would have been done earlier if we had had the allocation before we had to approve the update to the plan.
Right.
So what happened was we approved the update to the plan, right?
Right, so.
And then got the allocation after that.
I mean, you hit it right on the head where if the allocation's coming in late in the game, then we are, you know, we have this time limit we have to meet. So what we have, all districts well, the border districts in the state have let TPP know we need these allocations sooner to plan. So they are working on that to to set the allocations up ahead of time for the next, let's say, 6 years. As part of that process, you've heard about, I think one of our TPP folks was here last meeting about the border master plan. So that's going to take an inventory of projects, and that will be a ranking system, much to what you were speaking of, and that'll be a planning process. So then you can have the allocation ahead of time and know what projects to put it on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You know, this is, I guess, more for you than for TxDOT. In terms of process, does this project have to go or should have gone to TPAC, you know, so that we can rank and we can look at, you know, the programming and the planning and, you know, that we start looking ahead, you know, as to what is needed in terms of projects and, you know, or does this an exclusive TxDOT decision?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Marquez, is that we do attempt to follow the prescribed process. We would prefer things go through the technical committee. The request from the district, as it relates back to the STEP, there is an opportunity to submit it for approval. Now, I would be the first one to say that when it comes to project readiness, project ranking, that's the role of TPAC by bylaw definition. And so with that regard is that the district has identified a need in that area. The project has been historically in the plan. As mentioned before, there's also a phase 2. So before this body is that the district is asking for a contingency approval in the event that the FHWA were to approve the amendment, say tomorrow, this would be able to move forward. But I think in relationship to the district's priorities, if they have full autonomy of Category 11, as my understanding that the district engineer does have, if the question is for the district to communicate any future projects in terms of Category 11, certainly we, the MPO, would be open to that. But I think ultimately is that the direction should come from the policy board to the MPO staff to TxDOT along with TPAC for those type of recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Moody and Pickett, so I think you asked a really important question because I think we have to look at these things more holistically. For the board, as far as stage 2, and I want to be very transparent about my concerns, which I've expressed with TxDOT, so this is not a surprise to them. For stage 2, that process got selected before the people who represent the area now were formally in office for more than a year. So we weren't really part of the process when it became part. Our constituents, or I'll say my constituents, to speak for myself only, have now called this the road to nowhere. So the road is millions of dollar project that really doesn't help with congestion in the San Eli Clint area, that really just goes into the middle of farm field. For those of you who understand agriculture, it's it's destroying one of the biggest farms we have in the Lower Valley. When you do that, ag industry only exists when you have mass production. The minute you decrease production, there's a domino effect on the ag industry as a whole. And so when I've talked to my constituents, there's a lot of concerns about the project. We're very happy with stage 1, have lots of concerns on stage 2. Those concerns have not been addressed, but primarily for my constituents, the idea of spending plus $20 million on the road to nowhere just didn't make sense. And so that's why personally, I have been very vocal in my opposition to stage 2. That to answer your question, Chairman Pickett.
I second her motion to approve this. Phase 1 sounds good.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity, and to echo State Rep Gonzalez's opinion and her stance. I was presented with this project in its entirety a couple of years ago, and my concerns then and how I voiced them are exactly what they are today. And yes, you're right, it is premature to talk details about stage 2, or phase 2, but I also want to make it very clear that it is not fair to put it on us that there's going to be impacts to how it changes when I have been saying the same thing all along, which echoes my constituents' concerns, because the concerns I had, as she said, road to nowhere. It's almost 2 miles going east from our population right now. And so that's what I said before. I said it's not addressing that. So when you see it 2 years later and little to nothing has changed, I don't think it's fair to put it on us to say, well, you guys are going to be impacting something that has already been in existence. Now, mind you, we all agree it is a need. We have to get some relief transportation-wise to connect to I-10. It takes us almost 15 to 20 minutes to go 3 miles from San Luisario to the 10. So we all are in agreement on that, and we're all in agreement on phase 1. So it's just taking into consideration the current route of phase 2, which they had the opportunity 2 years ago to adjust. So thank you.
Is phase 1 a standalone? And it would appear that it does benefit, but so, because usually when you hear phase 1, phase 2 has a value add to a phase 1, but in this particular case, phase 1 is what is needed. Okay.
And phase 2 definitely would if the route were adjusted differently.
Got it.
Just want to clarify a few things with TxDOT and with the staff. The reason that there's some consternation here is we're moving from one plan to another plan. And staff and TxDOT should be a little bit concerned that if we make changes like phase 2, for instance, when I asked, was it modeled for conformity? And that's in the plan. So if we were to change plan or phase 2 right now, that would stop our process of getting the master plan. So I think the pushback isn't so much on listening to the concerns about phase 2 as the whole plan is kind of in jeopardy. So I think just understanding that, and it sounds like there's no objection to plan or phase 1, that we should move forward on that. And again, when the time is right, we get the new plan approved. I think that's the time to have the discussion in detail about phase 2, either changing the alignment or even deletion of the project.
Chairman, both chairman, either chairman, I completely agree. And since my concern with stage 2, I've really looked into the process, and I completely understand that it's modeled to determine our air quality. But I do think that there was a concern in the beginning of our objections to the plan that there wasn't complete understanding of how we could have changed things maybe 2 years ago. And I think we wouldn't be in this situation if there was stronger communication on everybody's part about how things could look different now. And I think now we're playing catch up. And so I think now we're trying to be a little bit more proactive as opposed to being reactive in regards to stage 2.
I second her motion again.
Do I have a motion to approve?
I will make that motion.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor and made to approve. The motion has been seconded. Another discussion?
What would be the process to
Yeah.
So as I understand the federal requirements is that one, our long-range and short-range plans must sustain financial and fiscal constraint. So we need to make sure that the money is there. With regard to making changes to those two plans is that this body certainly can remove it when there is a need for a new plan, an update, or an amendment. By removing the project in that fashion, it would trigger a new analysis for the MPO, which is pretty much a standard practice. There's another tool that the federal partner prescribes in regulation, where in the event that this project is not found to have financial support, we would notify the federal partner that there is a lack of funding, and it would be problematic for the MPO to move forward in developing this construction project. The third element to that is that anyone from the board can make a recommendation once the new plan is approved to remove the project at the next convenient opportunity.
If I may just tag on that a little bit, it's really critical in that process in terms of conformity when that happens. Because there are right now $300 million worth of projects in the current conformity consideration that are due to be let, in the next 9 months. And what we'd like to do is to get through the current conformity, get that approved, and then we can take a look at making changes that won't affect $250 million plus worth of funding.
Some discussions already about changing phase 2 to something that's more agreeable to that area. The current phase 1 is perfectly situated for any of these changes, or would it be better to change phase 1 to better match? Okay, so we're not making it harder to make the changes you want for phase 2 by building phase 1 the way it is. Okay. I just wanted to make sure we're okay there.
Right, and I think just to reiterate from the district's explanation is that although the project would be potentially cleared through one environmental document, there are two different phases, two different control section job numbers, and so they would go independent of each other. Is that correct? Okay.
Any other questions? Saying none. I do have a motion on the floor. The motion has been seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say nay. Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Item number 4 has been approved. Item number 5.
Item number 5 is discussion and action to approve recommendations from the Transportation Project Advisory Committee for A, B, C, and D, which I'll read individually. Item A is the Interstate Highway 10 ramp intersection improvement Phase 2 project for ramp and intersection improvements at Airway, Hawkins, and Viscount. CSJ number 2121-03-160, MPO ID number 1060X-2 to use $4,157,065 of Category 7 Surface Transportation Program Metro Mobility, $3,243,501 of Category 5 Congestion Mitigation Air Quality, and $120,000 of Category 12 Surface Transportation Program funding for a total of $7,520,566 in fiscal year 2018. Item number B is, given the lack of policy direction on the obligation limitation balance practice, defer to the Transportation Policy Board additional requests for the Interstate Highway 10 ramp intersection improvement Phase 2 project from A for ramp and intersection improvements at Airway, Hawkins, and Viscount, CSJ number 2121-03-160, MPO ID number 1060X-2 to use $1,744,800 of total available balance which would be 1,101,000 of Category 7 Surface Transportation Program Metro Mobility and 643,800 of Category 5 Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality, for a total project cost of $9,265,366 in fiscal year 2018. Item number C is, given the lack of policy direction on obligation limitation balance practice, defer fiscal year 2018 projects to use the remaining $210,000 of Transportation Alternatives Program set-aside funding. And item number D is, request that the Transportation Policy Board establish policy on obligation limitation balance.
Good morning. Greg McNichol, Chairman of the TPAC Board. This was a special call meeting, and because of a schedule conflict, I was not able to attend. And I want to make sure that, it had me out of town. I want to make sure that you hear some of the comments in case your questions go that direction. So I want to ask Jose Landeras, who chaired that committee, he's vice chair of the committee, to come up here and answer any questions you might have, because I do want to make sure that the committee's properly represented. Okay, so thank you.
Good morning, Jose Londeros, Vice Chair at the TPAC. I'm sure everyone, it's pretty clear what TPAC meant based on the agenda items. That was a joke. Tough crowd this morning, right?
That's okay, Jose. I have the same problem. Can I ask him a couple questions? Let me give you a couple, and this may be for staff or TxDOT. First off, I really haven't ever seen an item on the agenda this way, given the lack of policy direction. I've never seen an item start off that way. If we didn't have a policy, why wouldn't that just be the action item to begin with? And this has not been the first time we have had discussions about obligation limitation balances.
Okay.
So why the special meeting? And again, I'm a little thrown off at the way this is put on the agenda.
Sure, I can provide some context and sort of speak to the committee's decision and vote. At the regularly scheduled February TPAC meeting, TxDOT was requesting, after the last TPB meeting, as you all recall, there were TxDOT submitted an application for these reconciliation funds to the MPO. The TPAC voted to fund the projects in what the MPO has described and what's in your backup on when you look at the reconciliation of funds as the MPO available balance, which is smaller than the total balance. And the reason why there's a difference is what, as you can see on the agenda item, is referred to as the obligational limitation. So this fund is there that the MPO uses to address overruns and also during the reconciliation process with the Federal Highway Administration, if ever there's a need to actually program some dollars back to the federal government, that fund is set aside specifically for that. MPO has indicated that this has been a practice from the MPO since at least 2010. Might go back a little further than that. So
let me stop you right there. That sounds like a policy.
But there's no formal policy. It's a de facto policy.
Okay.
It's a practice.
So then, but why has it become an issue all of a sudden?
So at the regularly scheduled February TPAC meeting, the TPAC recommended funding the project at an amount of $7.5 million, which is the available balance, which ensures that there's a pool of funds set aside for obligational limitation. We requested that TxDOT submit the air quality analysis and supporting documentation included in an updated project request form to the MPO for the board's consideration this morning. Upon doing that, TxDOT requested a larger amount than what TPAC recommended at $9.2 million, which would program the obligational limitation balance down to zero. And so it was the direction of Chairman Moody that a special TPAC be convened to take additional action on the additional amount that was requested by TxDOT. And TPAC met last Friday to do that, but because there's no clear policy, as there is a clear policy for end-of-year funds, that the project actually has to be within the TIP or the MTP, that's a clear policy, but there's no clear policy actually establishing how much should be set aside annually for obligational limitation. So because of that, TPAC felt that given that we're a technical review committee and this is the policy board, that there was no clear guidance on how we should judge the additional request.
One more. Then at the same time, because you are our technical advisory committee, wouldn't you be making a recommendation on that policy to us at the same time instead of just a request establishment of a policy? So what would your recommendation be? Because I'd rather see either that first step, and I remember the discussions last month, and you know whether the information got submitted on time and all that other stuff. So do you have a recommendation?
No, we weren't posted for action to recommend anything to the policy board in relation to obligational limitation. And I would imagine that with other policy matters, it might be referred by the chair to the executive committee for them to establish. And
I don't want to jump too far ahead then, but if we're going to take these, then D, I would hope that we try not to do something just off the cuff here and send it back to y'all with a action item that you talk about with that technical process.
Right.
I'm hoping. Okay, thank you.
So going back to the question, if we're increasing the funding to 9.2 million, couldn't that affect our reserve? And what happens if we're impacted as a result of federal funding that could be short?
And that was the, I'll also defer to Mr. Medina to provide a little bit more context about that. But what TxDOT's request would do, if approved, would actually zero out you could think of it as a reserve for this fiscal year.
Okay.
In response to that?
Just to be clear, there is no sponsor that I'm aware of for 5A. TxDOT will not pursue a project that is not fully funded. So 5A is a useless exercise.
And to provide some additional context to that, 5A is the original TPAC recommendation from the regularly scheduled February meeting, where you can see that we recommended funding the project in the amount of $7.52 million. That recommendation stays, but the additional funds that were requested by the district, which are a little over $1 million, TPAC deferred whether or not to fund the project in that amount to the policy board again, because there was no clear policy direction on the reserve fund as to whether or not that was a practice that the MPO should be engaging in.
I got a follow-up question, and to your statement, Bob, if TxDOT will not fund the project, and it's already started, that's right? I mean,
This is phase 2 of the Fountains project.
Right.
What happens, very simply, if we don't have enough money to do phase 2, it will be another year before we can finish the project because we can only construct during a period of time.
So based on the email that you sent that I'm looking at here, or I guess the TxDOT sent, if we don't make this, if the 9.2 is not allocated, what happens to the project?
Well, we will go and try to get funding next year for it. So what that means is that all of the development on the south side of I-10, which is part of that overall project, will be delayed for at least another year.
Okay, that sounds a little different from what you said earlier. You said TxDOT would not move forward.
Oh, we're not going to move forward at $7.5 million. It's not a project. It's not fully funded. There's no way I can fund it. So I can't complete it. It's not a project that you can cut pieces out of.
Okay, time out. Just as clear as mud. So 5A and 5B both refer to phase 2. Are they different phase 2s?
It's exactly the same project.
Okay, 5A, let's stick with 5A for a minute. How much is it going to cost to do what 5A is describing regardless of the dollars? You're saying it's a...
9.265 million.
Okay, that's what it's going to take.
Yes.
So then what is B? That's the 9.265.
Correct.
Why is this twice?
B is the TPAC's deferment to the policy board. So
you're not asking, we can't take action on A and B. You're saying, here's
one.
A, here's B.
Right.
That's the first thing. Okay, so we have a
So
choice.
so item A is TPAC's original recommendation.
Okay, so let's get a little clearer. So A is the original, B is now what is on the table. So we're not passing both of them. So then to you, Mr. Bielik, your recommendation is A's can't even live with it because it's not enough money, but you would like us to approve B.
Yes.
And the talk about a reserve fund, if we were to need additional funds, wouldn't you have to make those up?
Probably.
Well, not probably, because we want to, I would like to move forward if we can. My understanding is if you caused it, you would have to make those funds available to us. I'm just looking for a fallback.
Yeah, the answer would be
Why
yes.
we would do
We
B.
would have to do it out of maintenance funds, out of Category 1 funds.
But you would make those up at the district? Because Representative Blanco asked the question, we're using up all our reserve funds. So that doesn't sound like a good thing. But you're saying if we go with B, and if the feds say we've done all the numbers and we went over on this one, we need $1.8 million, you're going to make that up. I would make that part of the motion for B. Move to approve B, and if there's any monies that we go over because we don't have a reserve, that TxDOT makes up out of district funds.
For this project.
Let me recognize the motion. So there is a motion on the floor. Is there a second to that motion? There is a second, so we do have a motion on the floor. It has been seconded. Discussion on that particular motion.
Okay, my question.
Actually, let me get to, Representative
Pickett, I already put it on. I have three things I'd like to ask. You just did one. Can we make it part of the motion that they be responsible for it? They're asking for it. So I don't think any of us should be responsible for it if it does fall short. That somewhere down the line that they come up with the change.
This happens all the time. I mean, it happens all the time that we don't see. Projects go over and the district makes it up. I just want to get it on the record so that we can go forward and make them accountable, but yeah.
I have a little bit of a problem even agreeing to it, because we know that amount is always a moving target. Anything can happen to it, and something may. Making this change in this unwritten policy of ours, what kind of effects is it going to have? Right off the bat, do we anticipate, has it already happened, and what's to stop any other entity at this table from being entitled to ask for the same thing on each project coming up? I mean,
And I'm saying that
we're setting
D-
ourselves up for
Well, I'm
trouble.
saying that D, we've done this twice already today on two that have already passed. These are unusual circumstances. It's like you never knew there was a problem until there was a problem. That first time someone calls, and I would still go forward on B, knowing that at the end of the day, request TB established policy on obligation limitation balances, be the last discussion that we have, and send it to TPAC for a recommendation. But because we've got phase one open, we already know how all this stuff works. The quicker that we can do it, get the district on the hook for any overages that they cause us, which any sponsor does anyway. I just think it's prudent for us to, bird in the hand.
So one thing that was discussed at TPAC is that might be relevant to the motion that is currently on the table is any overages for the region. The discussion was who would be responsible for that. So while there may be an overage on this project and TxDOT would look within their funds to program that balance, if there was another project that another agency was engaging in that ran over and then there were funds required, the question that we and the discussion we had at TPAC was who would be responsible for that. Would it be that individual agency, or would it be the district, or where would those funds come from?
I guess if I could just, talk about policy, is that this policy board has seen an example of this action. Whether it's a year ago, 2 years ago, if I can refresh the board's memory, is that the board, the MPO staff came before the board and said that there was a project that did not have sufficient funding that was going to have a conformity determination effect. So that project is Wynn Road. So we came forward and we told this body is that if we don't fund this project, we're going into a potential lapse. The policy states is that if there's shortage of funding, is that that agency that is responsible for that project, we, the board, can take revenue or funding from another project of that agency. And And that's exactly what we did. This body took money from CBD 4. And so that project was forced to be moved out into the outer tip. So moving forward, however, the decision is made here is that by policy, we would come back and strip funding if we are not financially and fiscally constrained from TxDOT and any other potential project.
Kind of my question is, if we're going to guarantee overages, what is the breadth of those projects? Which projects would be eligible to receive part of, if there was still a reserve, which, is there a definition of which projects there would be? Because that's agency-wide or area-wide, right? So all of our projects would be eligible for that reserve. So is Mr. Bielik going to guarantee for all of our projects or only tech? Yeah, I didn't think so, yeah. So,
So I guess I have a couple of questions kind of listening to this. Jose, so the TPAC is recommending less money. Can you explain why?
So the TPAC recommended 7.5 million, and that was the original meeting, because that was what was identified as being available to be programmed. The difference between those two numbers, between A and B, is the reserve boat, or as defined here, the obligational limitation. The only reason why TPAC didn't recommend funding in that amount is because there's a question of policy that arises out of that decision of whether or not the MPO maintains a reserve or whether or not you program balances all the way down to zero. And given that we felt unanimously that decision fell outside of the scope of a technical review of the project, we deferred that decision and we effectively punted the ball to the policy board to let you all make a determination whether or not you wanted to engage in that policy, and then also requested that we have some guidance or start to discuss how we address that in the future. And then I would like to add that item C is sort of the same circumstance, but out of the TAP funding. If you all recall, UTEP's pedestrian and bike enhancements to the entrance off of University and Oregon received TAP funding at the last TPB meeting. That project is not funded 100%, and there is a balance of obligational limitation left as well in that funding category. UTEP has agreed to fund the difference between the project cost and the available funds at the MPO, but we also did receive a request from UTEP to do the same thing that TxDOT is requesting, that if the board agrees to fund the phase 2 ramp improvements in the amount of 9.2 million, UTEP then submitted a similar request that the reserve fund for TAP also be programmed onto their project as well. So that's item C here, but that's the context of that.
And I appreciate the policy board taking into consideration all these dynamics. My concern is a little bit of a dangerous precedent we're sending in, kind of dipping into the reserves, and we had this pot of money and then saying, okay, well, we have this, so now we're going to completely fund. And so the dangerous precedent is a concern for me. But then as well as we saw in the last item, TxDOT said the project was going to cost $5 million. Now it's going to cost $15 million. Who's to say the project's not going to cost $12 million? And not knowing exactly, I know TxDOT said they're going to pick it up, but that's going to come from maintenance. What is a domino effect of that? And so I see some red flags for the future as we examine this. But again, I really appreciate all the considerations the policy board, the TPAC has done, because I think you bring up very valid questions. I just have a lot of concerns about the ways this is the process we are now creating and the precedent what we're setting.
Mr. Chairman.
Well, my question is going to be similar to what Representative Gonzalez just raised in terms of the domino effect and the guarantee that, in fact, the district will pick it up. I understand there was a reference made to maintenance funds, but is that, in fact, ironclad? Can Mr. Bielik, I mean, given the motion on the table, you're okay with it?
Any project that we do that has change orders that overruns the amount that we have programmed, I have to pick up out of our Cat 1 funding.
Okay.
That is standard. That is always the case.
All right.
Can we request a list of those change orders in advance?
For a project that hasn't started, there are no change orders in advance.
But there could be. They could increase the cost of the project.
But it doesn't affect this board at all. It
Well, I think it
affects
does.
my maintenance project.
I mean, I think it could affect the board if to Mr. Miller's point earlier.
I'll tell you what. TxDOT will withdraw item B, which is the only one we're the sponsor of. Just make sure that the media and everybody else knows that the project is delayed a year because we couldn't come to a decision here.
Well, I think.
Mayor Miller?
Well, and Mr. Bielik has a maintenance fund that cover his. What are some of the other entities gonna do if they have an overage? We don't necessarily have a maintenance fund to cover the overage. And we were all using the same fund. That's why it's a reserve fund, that's why it's there.
To add to Mayor Miller's point, the obligation limitation is also something, it's not limited to overruns. It potentially has the ability to be used for overruns. But it's important to note that at the end of every fiscal year, when the MPO, the district, and FHWA engage in reconciling funds, there are times when the federal government can actually reduce the amount of funds that that the region was entitled to. The last time that happened in the region was CMAQ funds between 2006 and 2010, where the federal government effectively told the MPO the region owes us X million dollars, and TxDOT at that time stepped in and provided funding for the region to actually make up for that shortfall. But that is the purpose of the obligation limitation, and it's approximately 6% of available funding that the MPO sets aside through practice, not through policy, annually.
To address Alderman Miller's concern, I think that's why item D is also a part of this, because at that point we can raise those concerns. Those of us who don't have the maintenance funds, what would the policy be? And so I think the TPAC for bringing this to our attention and lighting a fire under us to establish a policy to do so.
Just a follow-up question. If we were not to approve this, Mr. Bielik, are there other sources of funds where you might be able to make up that 1.79 million?
No.
And that means, that's why, I think, because somebody said that means that the project would not go forward?
That's correct. I'm not going to start out and pursue a project that I don't have the funds to complete.
Okay.
It's not eligible for maintenance funds in the beginning. If there's an overrun, I can use my maintenance budget to cover an overrun. But it is not a maintenance project, so I can't use that off the top.
Without this situation, we wouldn't be discussing the policy. So we would be bumping along like always. So I don't think there's anything wrong with this discussion. And as far as the issue that we voted on before, Representative Gonzalez, we can reconsider that one and just do the $5 million asphalt with no drainage. Because the description I got was it was doing a better project for a longer term. My motion is still to approve B. TxDOT makes up any differences. And I'll include in that motion a portion of D, and that we send back to TPAC to come up with a recommendation. So we don't have these, well, we're still gonna have these discussions, even if we have a policy. But to delay a project a year for $1.7 million that we know the district could make up. And almost everybody at this body thought before this discussion, if they were a sponsoring entity, they were making up the difference if it went over to begin with. If the city of El Paso had a project, the county of El Paso had a project, we all thought they were coming up with the difference, and what's been happening is it's been TxDOT for most of the purposes coming up with the differences. because that's again what we don't see here. Projects go over all the time. And when TxDOT reconciliates these monies and puts it in their plan, that's where we find out that we're short, because 20 projects that got let all went over a little bit, but we don't ever see that. So maybe we could include that as getting an update once a year as to how much everything went over or under and who settled up. But my motion remains to approve item B, and if there's any need for TxDOT to make up any differences, that they make it up out of their district funds.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I have a comment. I don't have an issue with the project itself, but I do want to clarify one thing, because you made mention of the fact that we had done something similar with Wynn Road, but we actually didn't, because with Wynn Road, we took away, or we delayed a project. Here, we're not delaying a project, we're taking from the reserves, is the way I'm reading it. So there's a distinction there. It's not the same thing that we're doing here.
The comment is for the future, is that if the reconciliation for next year is short, by policy, we would make a recommendation to the board to take from TxDOT projects. If there's a shortage, then we go after every other available project within that fiscal year.
Right, but we're not doing that right now, is my point.
Right, but I think
I want
that.
to be clear on that that's
Correct,
not what
but,
we're doing right here.
My responsibility to the board is to inform you all of the policy, and that's all I'm doing.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that I understand, if we approve A and B, so the project's 9 point.
It's A or B, and A's not even on the board, it's B to approve.
Okay, B. So if we approve B, and let's just say that we don't get enough federal funds by the end of fiscal 18, then Bob, can you still finish the project if there, you know, that 1.7, all of a sudden, we don't get $1 million at the end of the year from the feds?
Yeah.
You would make that difference up too then?
It's part of the motion. And he'll wash whichever bus you want that week.
They'll get all dirty.
The dirtiest one, the
They'll get all
dirtiest
dirty
one.
first.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Just to be clear, though, we are making up the difference from 7.5 to 9.2. We keep talking about if there's any additional overruns, but we are making up that difference right now.
Yes.
And to be clear, is it item B and D? Is that where we're?
Right now, what I have on the table is item B.
Item B?
Yeah, unless attorney, if I can include that or just keep D separate.
Yeah, I think you can, particularly under what the TPAC is reporting back and has on the agenda. I would just, you know, when you talk about item D, they're saying, give us a policy to go by. What we have is a practice, and practice differs from policy. Usually, practice in a legal sense is used from the bottom up. Policy is used from the top down. Policy becomes what the administration has to follow as set by the board. That's their instructions.
And I'd like to leave it in the motion, because the way it's written, it says, given lack of policy direction. So my motion would include that we ask TPAC for recommendations on
So you
a.
have both B and D, or that's what I heard you
Yes.
state, that's what I was asking.
Because I believe it's appropriate the way B is listed on the agenda.
And
So-
both are amended.
So
Okay.
I believe it was Senator Rodriguez who seconded that. Were you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll have that as part of the main motion on the floor. Any other questions?
I'd just like to read something else into the record, just so that it's clear. I don't think the TPAC meant to say it was a lack of direction. I think that they were caught in the middle, because in the past, the board has put it on the agency to make up the difference.
I agree.
So all they were saying is that, board, you have to decide this, because since that's happened before and you've set that precedent, this is changing that precedent. And now
After-
we have a new
I
precedent.
agree with you. After the explanation, I agree 100%. Yep.
Okay. So I do have a motion on the floor. The motion has been seconded. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Abstentions. Motion carries unanimously. Item 5B and D have been approved.
Mr. Chair, if I may, then that leaves the item C on the table. It was the sponsoring agency's request, that agency being UTEP, that if TxDOT was granted the obligational limitation funds, that the same be applied to be consistent with their practice to their pedestrian enhancement project. So we would we would request the board to take action on that request. And I'll defer any questions on that project to Mr. McNichol.
And I wanted to add, though, that we are ready to go forward with the project regardless whether the other additional 210,000 becomes available or not. We're ready to go forward with the project that was approved last month. Okay, we're not. Again, I'm just trying to be able to.
Move to approve.
I have a motion on the floor to approve items 5C. The motion has been seconded. Any other discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Abstentions? I have a couple nays.
Can you please raise your hand if you said nay?
And then another one over here. We have two.
There were 2 names on the C.
All right, motion carries. Item 5C has been approved. And forward, we have to delete item 5A. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
At this moment, I will entertain a motion to delete item 5A. I have a motion on the floor made to delete item 5A. The motion has been seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Item 5A has been deleted. Item number 6.
Item number 6 is a report on the amended Horizon 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Destino 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan Development.
Good morning. Roger Williams with the El Paso MPO. I'm going to give 2 reports here under this item. As you know, we're amending our current documents for the Horizon 2040, and also the part 2 of that is the Destino 2045 MTP. It's our new plan. The Horizon 2040 MTP, we have rerun our models here and submitted them to TTI for an update to the emissions. We received that information back from TTI on the 16th of this month, and we incorporated the information into the conformity document and have sent it back out to FHWA. We're waiting to find out their determination. This should be the last step in getting approval on the Horizon 2040 amendment. And on the Destino 2045 MTP, we've done our QA/QC work in conjunction with TxDOT and their consultant, CDM Smith, have then verified the project list and run our model, the travel demand model that is, and sent that to TTI again for them to do the emissions modeling. We do not do that in-house. And what will happen then is when we receive that information back, that'll be incorporated into our conformity document. The conformity document is ready and waiting for that. I received information this morning from TxDOT, TPMP, which is working with TTI on the emissions model, and they've indicated that we should receive that information today or Monday. So we'll be able to plug that into our conformity document. The other documents are being prepared and on their way very much to be presented for public involvement, starting public involvement coming up here on March the 9th. We've reserved space in the newspaper for the El Paso Times to do the advertisement for the public involvement. And we have all this information on all the plan development at the El Paso Forward website. And again, the public involvement is a 30-day public comment period starting March 9th, going through April 9th. We'll be doing additional outreach efforts. We'll be doing media releases, social media to get the word out, trying to get as many people out to these meetings as we can. And then after the public involvement in April, we bring this back through the process to the TPAC and to the TPB for your approval at your meeting in April. And then the documents will be forwarded from that point to the federal partners for their review for the conformity determination. And if you have any questions.
Any questions?
After which we can talk about phase 2 on 1110.
Yes, sir.
And again, I'm serious about that. The more that we understand that unfortunately we have got all these guidelines and most of them are federal. We've got a current plan that we're amending. We're going to transition to a new plan. And once that new plan is approved and there is a time period that we can make amendments or changes is when it's appropriate, and there's gonna be some. But that long-term plan is important to get it going, approved, and then we can make changes, additions. And so I just wanna go back. There isn't necessarily people fighting phase 2. It's just let us get through this, and then we can come back and realign or delete or whatever we want to do after that fact. Do you have a guesstimate on when that might be? Our federal partners may come back and we have a plan approved in hands, just a guess time, Roger?
We've, in our schedule, put in a 3-month, 90 days to be exact, timeframe. That's what the partners and the process are supposed to be able to.
Will they be making comments?
They
or are
do,
they gonna
and
wait the
sometimes
90
that
days?
90 days gets pushed, but.
They'll be making comments prior to that? They're not
Yes.
going to wait 90 days before they're making
We,
a comment?
within 1 month, we hope to have some comments back from them.
Thank you.
Any
Yes,
other
sir.
questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next meeting of the TPB is scheduled for 9 a.m. on March 23rd, 2018. And if there are no objections, this meeting is now adjourned.
We need a motion to adjourn.
Sorry?
Sorry, I need a motion to adjourn.
It carries.
No, I need a first and a second,
Really?
please.
All right, is there a motion? There's a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? The motion has been seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay.
I object.
Motion carries.
You did so well.